Investor Intelligence provides general information only. You should consider seeking independent advice to see how this information relates to your unique circumstances. Please refer to the terms and conditions available at investorintelligence.com.au for more.
Welcome to this week's episode of Investor Intelligence, your weekly podcast on all things investment, hosted by me, Jacob Kearns. Today I have with me our mentor team director, Herman Benade, and we're going to be discussing some advanced strategies that you might utilize when you're building a property portfolio and at what stage you might want to use these strategies. Hello, Herman.
Hey, Jacob, how's it going?
I'm good, thank you. So let me see if I've got this right. Typically, when you work with your members, you advocate for a buy and hold, long-term, pretty conservative approach, would you say?
Yeah, definitely. So we keep it pretty simple. We follow a buy and hold strategy here. And basically, we go through 3 stages: accumulation, correction, and debt reduction.
Right. Strategies. So often you're trying to, buy the right property in the right area, and depending on the strategy and the person, you're looking for equity to build that up, which will get you into your next property.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
We call that leapfrogging. It's typically when you buy a property off the plan and you basically put a deposit down, you get a year to save the settlement costs, and then we basically jump over each other.
Yeah.
For a 5-year period.
If someone was looking to go into some more advanced strategies, such as developing commercial, things like that, what should their property portfolio look like before they even start thinking about those strategies?
I think if you haven't done the bare basics, you shouldn't really be thinking about other strategies. Residential property, it works, right? That's like Luke's built basically all his wealth using residential property, not trying to do anything overly fancy, just keeping it super simple. So if you haven't gone down that path and you don't have an asset base, you're going to be restricted with certain other strategies, particularly if we're looking at the development side of things. You just won't get lending if you don't have an asset base that you can lend against. So until you've got your residential property portfolio where you need it to be, I wouldn't recommend trying different strategies. Developing is not cheap, and you will essentially need to borrow that money before you get that money back. So there's a period of, bankrolling the development. So a couple of questions that I would ask myself before I get into development. What is my appetite for risk? That's probably the biggest thing, because developments do fail. And they fail more often than what people actually think that they do. So if you don't have any experience in this, you need some nerves of steel, I guess. So if you tick that box and you've got an asset base, and most importantly, you've got the time to actually manage the development, then it might be an option for you. But if any of those boxes aren't ticked, so if you don't have nerves of steel, you don't have an asset base to lend against, then you can't develop. It's not a strategy that you could consider. And then last of all, are you going to treat it like a job? Essentially, there are developers out there, right, that do this, big companies, millions and millions of dollars, to do this day in, day out. So you're going up against the likes of those people. So your chances are stacked against you from the beginning. So to summarize, development should be the very last thing on your list if you've got some cash to play around with. It should not be a strategy that you follow with the hopes that you're going to make millions of dollars overnight, because it's most likely not going to happen.
Yeah, and it's not really investing, is it? Investing and developing are different things.
Completely different
yeah.
things. Yeah, absolutely. Developing, it's a career.
Yeah.
Like there's businesses that do this day in, day out. So like I said, you as a mom and dad investor, where are you going to get time? You're working 40 hours a week. Where are you going to get time to manage a whole construction process?
Yeah. And because it is different and there's a lot more things that you need to be aware of, as you were saying earlier, you need You need to get council approval and a whole range of other things. And that takes education, right? You need to know what you're doing. And we've previously had a successful developer on the podcast, Andrew Purdy, and he said that education mitigates risk. So as you said, you need an asset base, you need to have a big appetite for risk, but you also need to be educated too, right? And know what you're doing. Otherwise, you will end up as one of those developers that end up losing money.
100%. And networks. Networks are really important. Like who's going to be your trades, where you're getting your financing from, all of those kind of things. That's what a professional developer would do. But I've listened to the Andrew Purdy podcast and we've worked with him for a while. What he does and the conversations we have with members that go, I want to do development, they're vastly different. They're not even on the same planet. So Andrew would be a good example of someone that has capital, nerves of steel, and has got the education to actually deliver that and be able to work with councils to be able to make sure that the project at the end of the day still turns a profit.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's assume that for someone listening, if they do want to make this into a career and want eventually get themselves to a place where they do have that capital base, where should they start in terms of educating themselves on how to actually do this?
Well, there's university degrees around construction. It just depends. Like, are you just financing it and you're going to outsource the rest? Like, how involved do you want to be in it? Like, that's not what we do. Like I said, most of the developers I know, they kind of learned on the ground, but the big difference was it was their job.
Yeah.
Right? So it's what they do for a career. It's not a side gig.
Yeah. Okay.
So in terms of education, I'm sure there's a lot of sources out there around that, but I would bring development down to an accounting exercise, right? Being able to really understand your numbers, understand where the profit is going to get sucked out. That is the more important side of development, being able to really tightly run your numbers so the project still makes a profit, even if there are delays and things like that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the time developers, they lend the money to develop, right? So there's interest payments and things on big chunks of like millions of dollars to actually develop it. So 1 month, 2 months, 3 month delay in actually getting that settlement done actually adds up to quite a lot when you're talking about 7 or 8% interest rates.
Yeah.
Kind of thing, on $1 million.
And they might only be taking, 1 or 2 projects on per year. So they're waiting for those projects to be completed before they even get paid and before they can pay off their loans. And
Never mind the land. Like, you are going up, if there's developable land out there, right? Companies are going to outbid you as an individual every single day of the week, kind of thing. So doing a development is one thing. Doing a development that is going to turn a profit in the right area where people want to buy it, that's a whole different thing. And what kind of product are you putting on the ground? It's an endless kind of conversation. We could do a whole podcast just on the risks on developing.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's move on to another advanced strategy that people do want to utilize to earn higher yields, which is short stay. And I guess you could describe it as, using companies like Airbnb to rent out your property, and people are attracted to that because it does typically come with high yields. What should someone think about before jumping into doing a strategy such as short stay?
Does it come with higher yields?
I don't know, does it? No, not necessarily.
Again, like when we're looking at yield, right, we shouldn't just be looking at how much we paid for the property and how much rent we're getting. You also need to look at your fees that's involved in that, and that's what actually gives you the yield. So a couple of things with short stay. I don't think there's anything wrong with the strategy as a whole. It comes down to the property selection. So if you go and buy a property and you use up $500,000 of your borrowing capacity, which you really need to work for you, and you go and buy in the secondary market, for instance, for the purposes of renting that property on the short stay market, and you haven't taken into consideration any of the other investment fundamentals, like is there population growth, is there infrastructure going in, supply and demand, all of those kind of things, and the decision was to buy a holiday home and rent it out. Every time I speak to someone about short stay, it's because they want to use that property and go and stay in it, kind of thing, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. but you need to make sure that the fundamentals of the property still stacks up. So if you can't put it on the short stay market, can I still rent it, and does it still make sense for my strategy if I had to put it on the long-term market? So that's one. A couple of the cons: your insurances are going to be much higher than what you would if you had a long-term client. So that's one aspect that you need to take into consideration. Airbnb fees are not cheap, like 20%. And then you also need to take into consideration, so if they rent out, you're not getting the whole $180 a night. They're going to take their cut. Right?
So it's 20% of the rent.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, wow.
So where what normal real estate, 8-9%, right? So yes, you are getting those higher nightly rates, but you need to look at what your vacancy rate is. So if you've gone and bought investment property in an area that has really strong cycles, right? So, and typically most holiday destinations are going to have that. They're going to have a peak period and they're going to have a trough period. So you might be making a little bit more during the peak periods, right? But then your property is sitting empty for extended periods of time. So you need to do that research and figure out, am I going to be able to rent it all year round, right?
Yeah, be comfortable with those periods where it's not got someone in it.
Yeah, because your mortgage is still going to come, whether it's on the short-term market or not. So that is something to definitely take into consideration. Who's going to clean it? Who's going to do the bedding? Who's going to do all of that? I've had this conversation with quite a lot of my members where they go, oh, we can do this. I actually had this conversation with my parents. They want to buy a property to put on the short stay. And my first question was, like, when are you going to get time to go and turn it over? Like, you're treating it like a hospitality business if you're going to be on the short stay. Yeah. So you can't just leave your work in the middle of the day because someone else is checking in. So what are those fees going to be? And once you actually add all of these things up and you do your numbers around it, with the rental crisis that we've got in the country right now, you'll be better off putting your property in the long-term market than in the short-term market. Now, the property market is constantly moving, so there will be times in the next decade where it will be more beneficial to put it on the short stay market. But if your selection in your property was right from the beginning, right, then it doesn't matter how you rent it, right, or how you treat that business. It's just the problems typically come when people like buy a property on an island because they go, like, we've got a client like that, because they might like going sailing, or there's a specific event on that island or something like that. The capital growth for those properties are not going to be as strong as something in Victoria, for instance, in Melbourne, once we look at that second. Yeah. Properties.
And there's tax implications too, right? If you're buying a property for short stay purposes or for investment purposes and you're living in it periodically, you have to report that, and that has implications with the tax office as well.
Yeah, 100%. And if you bought that property in your SMSF, you cannot live in it at all.
Right.
You can't stay in it, not even for a night.
Yeah, okay.
Kind of thing. So those are some of the things. Some of the positives are obviously that you can get really high rents for periods, but I just urge people, if they want to go down this path, right, to make sure that it fits the strategy, first of all, so that you've got the right capital growth fundamentals, that you've done all your numbers, you clearly understand that market, understand the vacancy rates, and you've taken all your costs into consideration. You've not just looked at it from a high level kind of thing and gone, oh, I can get $800 a night in rent and it's only going to cost me $500K to buy the property. How many times in a year can you actually rent that property out for $800 per week? So just be realistic with yourself. Again, I would start doing this stuff once you've got a solid residential portfolio. So maybe property 5, 6, that could be a good option.
Cool. Another one we've got is investing in commercial property. And my understanding is that this is, again, an entirely different type of investing when compared to residential. Mm-hmm. Firstly, how does commercial investing differ from investing in residential property?
You need a bigger deposit to start off with. So 30% is the minimum you can do for commercial. Your lenders are obviously a little bit more restricted around that. Your yields, it just depends on what type of commercial you go into. Like if you are going into doctor surgeries or dentists, things like that, right, your yields might be really good. Where if you were to buy a property in the CBD, for instance, that's not going to perform really well for you right now because people aren't in the CBD as much as what they used to be. So I would say that I don't see anything wrong with commercial property. Luke has a mixture of residential and commercial, but obviously you need to be in the position to be able to get that 30% deposit ready. And typically these properties are obviously, we're more talking the millions, right? Like they're not going to be your 300, 400, 500k properties. They're going to be like the bigger type ones.
Yeah, and they're more closely linked to how the economy performs. Is that right?
Yeah. So obviously on the bright side, you get a tenant and you get a tenant for longer. So there's more stability there. So you might sign someone up for 3 years with an option to extend for another 2 years in comparison to residential property where you're obviously turning over tenants every year or every time someone needs to move. So there's a little bit more stability there, but there's also less supply and demand. So if you look at the two markets, the proportion of people that need commercial property in comparison to the proportion of people that need residential property in Australia, I would probably, if I was in someone's shoes that had a 30% deposit for commercial property, I would probably still go residential and maybe do a leapfrog strategy to get more assets underneath my belt. But obviously, there's other things to take into consideration. Your depreciation might be higher, depending on what type of commercial property it is.
Okay.
So I don't think it's a negative. I don't think it's a positive. I think if you've got the cash to do it, you've got the borrowing capacity to do it, and you already have your residential property portfolio, go for it.
Yeah.
If you don't have that, don't come into property investing going, I only want to do commercial, because your risks are really high, and you might buy a commercial property and commercial property don't rent as quickly as what a residential property would. So you might need to bankroll that for 3, 4, 5 months before you find the right tenant. Because you're not just going to chuck someone in there for a year. Around that. Also, if you are going into offices or anything like that, understand that some people might want you to contribute towards the fit out of that office, but then obviously all the outgoings and all those kind of things are the tenant's responsibility in commercial property. So there's definitely loads of pros and cons around commercial. I think the same as any other strategy that we have discussed so far, make sure you've got a solid portfolio first before you do anything else.
Yeah, okay. So our next one, I suspect might be a little bit similar to developing, and that is using value-add strategies such as renovations, flipping, or subdivisions. So how could these strategies fit into someone's strategy?
I'll split that up into two separate things. We'll do renovations and flipping. I'm presuming when you talk about renovations, we're purely talking about flipping, so buying and selling. Okay. And then I'll talk about the subdivision after that. So first of all, in terms of flipping property, it's exactly the opposite to what we teach. Okay, so we stay as far away from that as possible. I think the age of buy the worst house on the best street is gone, right? Like particularly considering the competition in the market, you have to be well positioned in the market to catch good deals like that. But our biggest problem with it is the tax that you pay. So when you go in a cycle of buying and selling, right, very similar to what we've discussed in the developing side, to make sure that you do your numbers properly. So you might buy a property, 500k, spend 100k on it, do a quick renovation, sell it for $700,000. In your mind, you go, I've made $100,000 and I've managed to be able to do that in 1 year. I don't need to work anymore. You have not made $100,000, right? Because you paid stamps to buy that property, and then you're going to pay capital gains tax to sell that property. So your profit is actually only going to probably be like 40,000 around that. That doesn't account for any delays. That doesn't account for any of the interest that you've paid on that property while it's been on the market after you've renovated it. So it's about really doing those numbers. I have spoken to quite a few of our members that have been really successful in the buying and or the flipping side of things, and they've made quite a lot of money throughout their career. Now they're in their 50s. They haven't held any of those properties. They've sold them all, right?
Yeah.
So where's the passive income coming from?
Yeah.
So those are our biggest problems with that. Again, there's nothing wrong with the strategy, and there is ways to make money from it. But it's, again, making sure that you've got a good accountant and you treat it as an accounting exercise, not oh, I want to make a house look really pretty. Like, what can you sell it for? What research have you done? It's all kind of coming back to that education. And this education isn't picking up a book. It's really understanding the market that you're going to invest in. But for us, it just doesn't make sense to keep on paying stamps, keep on paying capital gains tax, and that's cash that you can never get back.
Yeah. And you have to factor in also your own hourly rate and deduct that from any profit that you make, because if you've made a profit but you've worked all these hours and you factor in your hourly rate, you might not have made any profit at all once you take that away, and you've taken on a lot more risk to do that.
Yeah, but we speak to lots of people that do it. They kind of get to that stage in their career where they're like, I don't see myself going any further here. So, and it's typically couples, and they go and do this, and they do it for a job, and they're happy to get that salary. That's fine. Like, you can do that for a job. That's completely fine. But what are you holding on to, right? What are you holding on to that's going to give you a passive income in the later years, right?
Yeah.
Because what we are trying to prevent people from doing is get to that retirement age, and then as soon as you get to retirement age, you've got a pool of money that you have to draw down from. Yeah. I can't imagine anything more nerve-wracking than that, knowing that, okay, you've stopped working. The way the Australian workforce is, the likelihood that at 50 or 60 you can re-enter the workforce because you've run out of money is very unlikely. So where's your options? So what we want to do is make sure there's income always coming in, and we never get to a point where we are essentially pulling down from a lump sum. So that's the biggest trap that most people that have followed this strategy falls into. There's no holding the property.
So on the flipping side, you don't really advocate for that. But if someone was to buy a property, renovate it a little bit and hold it, would that work better?
Yes, it would be better if you held on to it because you're creating passive income. But is it the best option for you? Probably not. Because you're still investing your time, you're still buying a second-hand property, your depreciation benefits are always going to be better with a newly built property unless you're really gutting a place and starting it from scratch.
Okay, so if you were to do that, does that, because you're putting some more money in, does that affect your depreciation?
Yeah. So if you do renovations, you can claim with depreciation on renovations, providing it's an investment. So just really clear on that.
Yeah, so not your home.
Yeah. And not your home. So there's easier ways to get there quicker. That's my opinion, right? So, but if you're doing it because you're really passionate and that's what you like doing, I don't see anything wrong. The only thing I would say is hold on to some of those properties so you've got passive income.
Yeah.
And make sure that you still follow the same investment fundamentals, like if you were to look at a new property, what infrastructure is coming, what's the population growth, all of those kind of things, because that's really going to be the thing that drives that capital growth.
Okay, cool. And what about subdivisions?
I think so. When we speak about subdivisions, or when we speak to our clients about subdivisions, it's typically your PPR that you want to split a part of that off. I see absolutely nothing wrong with that. Turning an asset that's not income producing into something that is income producing makes complete sense, but it's the same process that you'll need to go through as if you were to do development. So there's council planning, there's engineering, there's civil works, there's all of these things that you need to have a really clear understanding about. You obviously need the borrowing capacity, you need to have some capital behind you. If you are subdividing and it is on your PPR, are you knocking the house down? What are you going to do for that period when the house is knocked down?
You also have to, if you're not moving out of the house, you have to live with people in your backyard making all the noise. And,
but we are renovating at the moment and basically in a construction site sometimes. So it can get to you. So on one side, turning an asset that is not bringing an income into something that is, that's really good. And that's not something that we would say is a bad idea. It's just, again, making sure that you know what you're walking into and you've literally checked every single cost that's going to come with it, because if local council can put out their hands for cash, they will. And it stacks up. So just make sure you've done your numbers. It makes sense. You're financially ready, kind of that 3 stages of readiness that we do for our members. That's what you need to do if you're going to go into subdivision. You need to understand why you're doing it. You need to be emotionally ready to be living on a construction site for a little while. And you need to be financially ready for any delays or anything like that. But yeah, makes complete sense to me.
What if it was someone who doesn't live there but is maybe looking for to buy properties that have that potential to subdivide and maybe turn into duplexes, or what do you think about that?
It depends on why you're doing it. So at the end of the day, it's pretty much the same as what I said before. It's easier ways to get where you want to get to than going down this path. First of all, if you're going to buy it and you're not living in it, how's the tenant going to feel? So if you're renting it out, how's the tenant going to feel living on a construction site? So there's a lot of things to take into consideration. I think to summarize that one, it is a good strategy if you can have it. I don't think it should be something that drives your strategy. I think that's what you should go out and look for.
Yeah, okay. So just if it makes sense for you and you're happy with all the things that we've discussed. One more thing I want to talk about. Now, I know you're not an accountant or mortgage broker, but people often want to know what are the tax strategies or the finance strategies that they can use to hopefully get them into their next property or make them more money from their investing. Are there any strategies that you could touch on?
I wouldn't call it a strategy. I think your tax position forms part of any strategy. So we can look at pretty much any of the things we've just discussed, commercial, short stay, developing, right? Tax is going to play a part in all of those things, right? How much tax you have to pay towards the government, how much tax you'll be able to claim back based on depreciation and things like that. So I don't think, I see quite a lot of advertising out there saying, oh, did you know you can use a tax to pay off your mortgage in 10 years, 15 years, all of those kind of things, right?
Okay.
That is not a strategy. In our opinion. As part of a buy and hold strategy, we utilize tax to, first of all, get to the next property sooner, and then later down the track to help reduce the debt. So we use depreciation as a way to get to the second property quicker, and obviously in the debt reduction stage to pump more money into the mortgage so we can get that unencumbered portfolio.
Yeah.
So I don't think tax is a strategy. It forms part of other strategies.
Okay. And should someone be wary if they're seeing advertisements for, use your tax to do this, and, is that kind of sharky?
No. I don't think there's any... You need to do a bit of research on the company. Technically, you can't say that is giving financial advice. So if the business is not a financial advisor, then I would be wary of that. Not because of what they've said there, because you can pretty much find out on the ATO website how you can use investments to better your tax position. So that's not secret information. But if they're going down the path of telling you what you should do with your tax, which they can't do, which is financial advice, and they're not qualified for doing that, you need to be asking yourself the question, well, what else is going to happen?
As in...
Like, what property are they going to present? Like, if you're
yeah,
starting off on that foot, where does it go?
Yeah.
Kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
they're selling you something, essentially.
Yeah. So the more you educate yourself, the more you'll understand that, hey, that is just a natural thing that happens when you buy property, providing that you've bought the right property. Yeah. Kind of thing. So that's kind of what I mean with tax. Tax on a different note, though, on the flip side, and I know this is not around strategies, but it's really important that people do their taxes at the end of the financial year, because if you go and buy a property and your taxes aren't up to date, you won't be able to settle on that property. So you need to make sure that your taxes are up to date. So that's where I mean taxes more forms part of the strategy rather than this strategy. Yeah,
that makes sense. So with financing, there's a few things that I want to touch on. One, seller financing. So if you're buying a property and the seller is offering you to finance that loan rather than going to a bank.
Yeah, never do that.
Yeah, okay.
Just very simple. No, I wouldn't do that. First of all, you need to go through a broker. That is number one rule. Would not go to your bank directly. Reason being is there's hundreds of products, financial products out there, right? If you only put yourself into this one little column and you only look at your bank that you normally bank with products, how do you know that you're getting the best product that's out there? So I will always be using a broker. I would never, ever recommend that someone takes out financing from the developer. Why would you need to do that?
Yeah, okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And if you do need to go and do that, you should probably ask yourself the question, should I be buying this property?
Yeah, that makes sense. In terms of financing and your finance structure, if you are growing a portfolio, are you looking at interest-only loans?
Yes, not for the entirety, because you need to reduce the debt on your portfolio, right?
Yeah.
So in the beginning of this call, when we spoke about our strategy, we spoke about accumulation, correction, and reduction. So in that accumulation part, that first 5 to 8 years, what we want to be doing is using as much of the bank's leverage as we can, because the bank still owns it, and you want to keep most of the risk on the bank, not on you.
So you're saying, yes, interest-only loans in that first accumulation phase.
Yes. But you need to have a strategy to obviously reduce that debt. So you can't just keep them on interest only. So that will typically happen for 5 years, and they go to principal and interest. And this is where the strategy, particularly if you've got multiple properties, this is where the strategy becomes even more important, right? Understanding what your numbers are going to look like, understanding what your cash flow is going to look like, making sure that you've got the right tax structures in place so you can still enjoy your life while you're investing.
Doing interest-only loans, that will help you get into your next property quicker?
Yeah, because essentially it means you can save quicker for that next property. So your capital growth is still going to happen. And just in that beginning stage, keep the risk with the banks, and then obviously have a really solid plan to reduce that debt. Okay. Also, bearing in mind, if you are in a high risk role, right, where you get the chance of getting sued, or if you run a business or your doctor or something like that, and there's a chance that you could get sued, keeping your debt levels high is actually a good thing, because if someone sues you, they're going to sue you for the equity, not the property. So debt levels in the beginning should stay high, but it's going to be on a case-to-case basis. Like if someone came to me and they were in their late 50s, right, and then they want to at least get like $20,000 or $30,000 in passive income or something like that, I'm not going to recommend that they go straight into an interest-only loan for 5 years, right?
Yeah.
If they can afford to do principal and interest from the beginning.
Yeah.
Otherwise, retirement's not going to happen until 75, 80, if you leave it a whole 20 years. So, yeah, that's kind of where that is.
Okay, I think that's a good place to end on. So it sounds like a lot of these, if you want to call them advanced strategies, most people shouldn't really be focusing on these if they're in the early stages of growing their portfolio. It's focusing on that accumulation stage, getting as many properties under your belt as you can. And then maybe if you want to make it a career and you've got that asset base, you're prepared to put in the work and education, maybe then you can start looking at these advanced strategies.
Yeah, I would say all of these strategies you can definitely make money from, and they can work, but you need to ask yourself this question: why am I doing this? Because all of the strategies that we've discussed today are more difficult than just going out and buying a normal newly built property, which still gets you in the same end result, right? So why am I deciding to do something the more difficult way to get to the same result? And then if that is because I'm really passionate about it, or because that's what I want to do with my life, I don't want to work in an office anymore, I want to do flip houses and things like that, go for it. Right?
I think it comes down to speed though, right? Because if you are, as I said, putting in all that work, and maybe let's use developing as an example, if you are doing developments, you're making that money quicker if things go to plan.
Well, first of all, like I said in the beginning, no asset base, no capital, no development.
Yeah.
So you might want to be a developer till you're blue in the face, and we have this conversation quite regularly.
Yeah.
Like, I want to develop. My following question is, how much capital do you have? And it's, I've got $60,000. No bank in their right mind is going to lend you money when you've got no track record of ever completing a successful development. Why would they? Like, there are people in banks that are purely there to prevent this risk. So ask yourself, why do you want to go that route? So there's nothing here that's going to get you there quicker.
Okay.
There's nothing there, right? So you would need a property portfolio before you can do development. You would need assets. So you would have gone through that process anyway, or you might inherit a bunch of money and then go and decide to do that. It might get you there quicker. You might lose all your money.
Yeah.
So it's a bit up in the air. Short stay is not going to get you there any quicker.
Yeah.
Commercial is not going to get you there any quicker. Value adds is definitely not, if anything, it's going to delay you even more. Subdivisions might get you there quicker. And then obviously a tax position is going to get you there quicker. People have been around for long enough to know that if it looks too good to be true, and it sounds too good to be true, it's probably too good to be true. So if developing was easy, if flipping houses was easy, we would all be doing it and we'll all be rich.
Yeah.
It's not.
Okay. Well, that's a great place to wrap up. Now, I do have 2 more questions.
Yeah.
What's your favorite book or podcast?
Well, the podcasts are all the true crime ones. So I'm going to go down that path. And probably Legacy.
Legacy?
Yeah, Legacy. Can't remember who writes it, but it's about the All Blacks and it's about business and managing cultures and things like that. So, yeah. Legacy.
Okay. And my final question, it doesn't have to be anything we've talked about today, but what are you excited about for the future?
Everything, really. There's I'm 30 years old, so I've got my whole life ahead of me. So, yeah, everything. Yeah. Building a portfolio, hopefully I can get to the point where I can retire in my early 50s and travel the world. So
nice.
Yeah.
Sounds exciting.
Cool.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Herman.
Thank you, Jacob. Have a good day.
You too.
Bye.
If you found this episode or any of our episodes helpful, please make sure to share and leave a rating to help us reach more people on their investing journeys. And of course, subscribe to be notified when new episodes drop. Make sure to follow the podcast on Instagram at Investor Intelligence Podcast. You can find links to our other socials in the show notes, including a link to the Property Mentors weekly blog. If you're ready to get your property portfolio in shape for financial freedom, check out Luke's latest book, Property Fit. You can get yourself a copy at www.propertyfitbook.com.au.